February 8th was a day many thought they'd never live to see. The Eglinton Crosstown finally opened. After many years, many delays, and many billions of dollars, Line 5 is up and running. And just a few months earlier, the Finch LRT opened too. So people now have two new ways to get around. Has it been a smooth ride so far? We look at what planners should learn so that future projects won't go off the rails. One of the big hopes behind projects like these is simple: fewer cars. And that wouldn't just cut down on traffic. A new book looks at the kinds of physical, environmental, and societal harms cars can cause, and challenges us to imagine and fight for a different kind of life. Welcome to The Rundown. Multiple delays, organizational infighting, and billions of dollars over budget. After 15 years of construction, the Eglinton LRT is finally taking riders across the city. And the Finch LRT is up and running too. We look into the difference they'll make and at what planners should do differently next time around. Andy Takaki is the transportation reporter for the Toronto Star, and he joins me in studio. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. All right, it has been almost a month since the Eglinton Crosstown launched, 3 months since the Finch LRT has launched. What do you say Metrolinx has learned from this experience?
So we've heard from the CEO himself about kind of the lessons the agency has learned on Finch and with Eglinton. Mainly it's the contract structure, which has been much aligned by lots of public officials, but basically, they are learning to step away from big contracts that give full responsibility to one private consortium or packaging all of that risk into one contract. They've learned that for the Ontario line, which is broken up into several smaller contracts. Another part of that is also the soft launch approach to these new lines, which was really emphasized on Eglinton. Finch a little less so, but I think they've learned that building up a lot of hype for a line that they need to ramp up service on is maybe not the best approach, especially after what we saw happen on Finch.
Fair enough.
So I think those are, kind of the main lessons that they've learned with Eglinton and Finch. Yeah.
All right. So whether it's with fanfare or not, I am curious, how much of a difference does having both of these lines up and running actually have in terms of moving people across? You've done mini-series where you've documented some of the worst commutes in the city, but how much does having something that can go east to west across the city help?
I think it really changes the game, especially for east-west travelers, like you were mentioning, right? Like so far, if you're taking the Line 2 to work and the Line 2 is shut down in portions, then you have to kind of rely on the shuttle bus or an Uber, or you have to circle around the Line 1 or something like that. Now you can theoretically take the Line 5 across the city, right? It does provide kind of redundancy for the Line 2 in case it's shut down. Especially for the people who live along those lines, I'm sure it's a game changer if you're commuting on Finch to Humber, if you're on Line 5, or even trying to get to the airport, it provides a connection to the UP Express. So I think it changes the way people will travel in the city and hopefully provide some relief for riders on Line 2.
When you said shuttle bus, I got a little shivers because I think a lot of people, when they think of any delays.
Doesn't everyone, yeah.
Let's go north to the Finch LRT. They announced transit signal priority. For people who aren't familiar with that, what is that and how has it been rolled out so far?
Yeah, so basically the way transit signal priority works is for trains that run on the same level as car traffic, if you pull up to a red light, you're waiting there for a full red light cycle like a car would before you're able to go through, right? The way transit signal priority works is the train is able to signal ahead to, the red light and say, hey, I'm carrying a lot of passengers, let me through, and it'll extend a green light for transit, right? Or it'll have an early green light signal ahead of left turning vehicles. And that was a big problem on Finch, even just from personal experience when I took it after it first opened. We were we were stuck behind red lights a lot of the time. And if you ride a downtown streetcar, you know that that's a common frustration, even on Spadina or lines like Finch, where there's a right-of-way for the streetcar. You're not contending with other traffic, but still you have to wait behind a red light. And so transit signal priority is a way to speed up the trains, especially when you have, like on Finch, where a lot of the stations are on the far side of the signal. So you're waiting at a red light, and then you pass the red light, and then you're stopping again at the station. That can be really frustrating as a rider, right? Because you're stopping twice.
In terms of speeds increasing, in terms of commute times rather, decreasing, have we noticed that with signal priority, or?
Anecdotally, I mean, the city has rolled it out over the past couple of weeks, and I've kind of heard from people who take the Finch West LRT that it's been running a little smoother, kind of closer to the target times that were promised by Metrolinx originally when the project was first announced. So that's good news. I haven't been on it personally yet. I think that's something that I'm looking forward to testing out.
I want to go back to sort of the conversations with Metrolinx. Help us understand sort of the conversations that are happening behind the scenes. Who is the adult in the room when, say, TTC and Metrolinx are blaming each other, for transit not being built on time or for not being on budget?
I mean, we kind of saw that with Finch, especially in the first few weeks when transit signal priority was a big issue and the speed of the trains was a big issue. It was kind of a back and forth between TTC and Metrolinx about who was really responsible. We couldn't really get a hold of the private consortium who's in charge of maintaining the line, right? To be honest, there isn't really an overarching authority, right? Like theoretically, Metrolinx answers to the province, and the city in a way kind of answers to the province because it's a creature of the province, like through legislation, but there is no governing agency in charge of all transit, in charge of the TTC and Metrolinx who can say, you guys need to get into a room and talk to each other. The head of the TTC regularly talks to the head of Metrolinx, we know that, but what those conversations look like and who's kind of has the authority to have final say, I don't think is really clear right now.
I want to talk a little numbers here. Having public sectors back into the office, 5 days a week. I know it's been sort of a slow increase for a lot of people there. Have we seen an increase in ridership? But one thing that I think a lot of people, when we talk about these big projects that the province and other levels of government get to announce, is it's the nice flashy kind of announcement. But at the end of the day, who the maintenance part of all of that? And so I think a lot of people are worried about costs. Bottom line for commuters, will fares go up? Can we see some of that down the line? What's the conversation been around there?
I mean, that's kind of the thing that we're looking forward to this year, especially with the TTC budget, is they were warning late last year when they were considering putting forward the budget for this year that they are having to put drivers onto 2 new lines. They're taking on those operating costs with some help from the provincial government, but the TTC also has a massive state of good repair backlog, right? That's why we have slow zones. It's why we have early nightly closures on parts of the Line 2 and Line 1. It's why sometimes your streetcar is diverted because they're doing track maintenance on streetcars. All of those things are being need funding. And so far, I think it's in the billions of how much they're underfunded, right, for state of good repair. So with all that said, without any kind of operating funding from either provincial governments or the federal government, it seems like the TTC will have to figure out a way to increase, its funds. Otherwise, they're in a tight spot. And something that they were talking about was whether or not a fare increase could come down the pipe. And it doesn't seem like there's much appetite for this year, but maybe next year, in the next few years, it would take a significant fare increase for the TTC to cover its budget shortfall.
We still got a few more transit projects in the hopper. We've got the Ontario line, the Scarborough subway. Can we expect those projects to avoid the fate of the Eglinton Crosstown?
It's a good question. I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to say whether or not it will, but there were some issues with the Scarborough subway extension with the tunnel boring machine that seems to have been cleared up. It seems like they're making pretty decent progress on that. The Ontario line is a really complex project. It tunnels right through the core of downtown, right? You're dealing with a lot of old infrastructure, which is the same problem you had on Eglinton. Whether or not they run into the same kind of unexpected issues and are able to navigate that, hopefully they've learned some lessons from Eglinton and are able to fold those lessons in. But I think with mega projects like the Ontario line especially, you have to expect a few years of delay. I mean, that's kind of standard for big contracts, big transit projects even across the world. But I don't think that's to say that you can let Metrolinx kind of get away with not communicating on these issues and talking about what's stalling these projects. Yeah.
All right, whether it's fare increases or new subway lines, we will keep our eyes on it. Andy, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Here's a stat that might surprise you. Globally, SUVs create more carbon emissions than the entire country of Japan. That's just one of the numbers from Life After Cars, freeing ourselves from the tyranny of the automobile. It's a new book that counts the costs of our driving-centric culture and lays out a new path forward. Rundown producer Colin Ellis sat down with two of the book's co-authors, who also host the War on Cars podcast.
Sarah Goodyear, Doug Gordon, good to meet you. Thank you for joining us on the Rundown.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to start with a little bit of a confession. I don't drive.
Interview's over.
I know. I'm sorry. You can. No. I never got my license. As a kid, I grew up in downtown Toronto. Never needed it. Parents didn't drive. I felt a little embarrassed about it. I actually always have felt a little embarrassed about it. But then I read in your book a stat that made me feel less alone. I think it said 1 in 3 Americans don't drive. Is that true, Sarah?
That is true. There's a wonderful book called When Driving is Not an Option by a disability rights activist called Anna Zivarts. And she brought that statistic to the forefront for us. 30% of people in the United States of America, obviously one of the most car-centric countries in the world, don't have a driver's license. They're too young. They have a disability that prevents them from driving. They don't want to drive. Maybe they're undocumented. So, and then of course there are all the people who age out of driving. So yeah, there's a lot of people who just can't drive. And what do we do with those people? We just basically tell them to accept a life in which they are less a part of society, maybe not able to access certain opportunities and less enfranchised. And yeah, and there's a kind of shame about it too, right? Because it's like, oh, you're not a real grown-up if you don't know how to drive. I'm sorry that you had to feel that.
It's just my family that gives me a hard time. It's not a big deal. But Doug, it seems almost counterintuitive considering America is so car-centric, right? I mean, you think of the culture, you think of the big 3 automakers, you think of the Fast and the Furious franchise, you think of Detroit. It's just so ingrained in American, and I should say Canada too, that you just get your driver's license at 16. What's the big deal? But like it's not that way, is it? Like.
No, I mean, first of all, there is that huge number of people who just don't or can't drive. And most North American cities were not designed or planned around driving. They were designed and planned around streetcars and walking and even cycling in some cases. And they were later bulldozed for highways, in many cases, right through the middle of them. So a lot of what we're talking about in the book is that this is a rather recent phenomenon, as much as there is no person alive today who doesn't know a life before cars. It really wasn't that long ago. We're talking about 70 to 100 years of car-centric design that has warped our perceptions of what cities are and how people should live.
Well, you write in the book that we are not driving cars. Cars are driving us, and we're headed for an existential crash. Sarah, in what ways are we heading for an existential crash?
Well, the negative effects of car dependence are so long you could write a book about.
And you did.
and I've written, we wrote a lot of the book sort of details some of the costs that people might not realize. In the United States of America, 40,000 people lose their lives on the roads every year. That alone is a huge cost. That doesn't take into account the hundreds of thousands of people who sustain injuries, and many of those are life-altering injuries. But then there's the pollution. The air pollution also causes a lot of death and illness. And Then there's the environmental cost to our climate. Obviously, if SUVs were a nation, they would be among the top 10 most carbon emitting nations in the world.
Is that right, eh? Top 10.
Yeah.
SUV drivers.
SUVs.
Wow.
Yep. And then there's the effect on, animals, that we're killing them. They can't reproduce properly because they don't have their habitats that are cut up by roads. There is also the cost to society. And I think this is one of the ones that I really think about all the time, at what we're losing when we put ourselves into a system that requires us each to be in our own individual metal box all the time to do anything. We're not interacting with our neighbors, with our fellow citizens and in the city. And so, there are all of these costs, they're piling up, and we're blind to them a lot of the time. We don't understand all of these negative effects that are happening because the car is just a thing that you have to use, right? To do your business, to go to work, to go to school. And so, what we're trying to do with the book is to help people see that there are these terrible, terrible costs that cars extract. I haven't even talked about the financial cost for people.
I'll have to jump in and say,
Yeah.
in the U.S., a new car is over $50,000. Insurance has gone way up. It's absurd that if you want to live in most places in North America, the cost of entry is a giant metal box with rubber wheels and glass all around you. We are born as human animals with the ability, most of us, to walk or to roll around on our own power. And it is really absurd that if you took us out of New York and plopped us in, a suburb of Toronto or Atlanta, Georgia, the price of admission for full enfranchisement in society is car insurance, a license, God forbid you get in a crash and have to deal with the health impacts of that, or the inconvenience then of not having your car because it's in the shop. And if you really step back, it's absurd that we built our society this way.
I want to ask you about the title of your podcast, The War on Cars.
Yeah.
It's a little tongue-in-cheek, I guess. But where did it come from, actually? I know we had a mayor, Rob Ford, many years ago. He ran a campaign against the war on the car, and he won. But I'm assuming we can't take credit for the... or can we? Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We were following Rob Ford very closely during those years. And when we decided to start a podcast back in 2018, and we were thinking of what to call it, and we came up with all sorts of really boring, bad names. And Streets Pod, no. And so I just blurted out one day, I was like, you know what this podcast is? This is the podcast of the war on cars. And we all laughed, and then we said, wait, that's it. So yes, it's basically, we're trying to take back from people like the late Rob Ford. We're trying to take that and, okay, we'll appropriate that for ourselves. You want to call us the war on cars? Okay, maybe we will be. And so yes, there is a tongue-in-cheek nature to it. I've had a lot of people say that the name of the podcast is too confrontational. The truth is that in order to break through and get people's attention, sometimes in media, you have to really try to shake things up a little bit.
I mean, that's why Rob Ford screamed about a war on cars, because he knew it was a red meat for the culture war, and he, it worked for him, right? He got elected.
We're in Ontario, which is a big province. I mean, geographically, I think it's bigger than France and the UK combined, is what I've been told. And there's just a lot of places where you just can't live without a car. I mean, you can't get around, otherwise you're going to be walking for a while. I guess, what do you say to those folks who say that, you kind of just need a car in certain places?
I would say, cool, use a car. A car is a tool. And just like you have different utensils in your kitchen drawer, and sometimes you need a soup spoon and sometimes you need a steak knife, depending on what you're eating, depending on where you're going and what type of trip you're making, a small car might be perfectly fine. A giant Ford F-150 is probably a bit of overkill if you're just going to get groceries. If you're going camping, it might be a perfect, or you're towing a boat, that's a great tool to use. I use a car when I take a camping trip with my family because it's the easiest and best way. But I ride a bike to the grocery store, or I walk to the transit stop to get to work. And I think of mobility like that kitchen drawer of tools. Like, what's the right tool for the job I'm doing? And if it's a car, we've had to drive on tour to get, from airports that are not accessible to the downtown by transit. What's the choice? And so we recognize that everybody is operating within this system, but also there are always going to be places where a car is going to be the best tool for the job. We just tend to not think that the middle of a dense city is the best place at all times for all people.
The problem is that there aren't a lot of choices if you don't want to drive a car. In Europe, for instance, there are hundreds of cities that you could live in comfortably without a car. In North America, there are a handful of cities where you can live comfortably and really fully participate in the civic life of the city. What we advocate is for more cities to provide those options for people. There are a lot of dense cities and dense parts of cities in North America, that could have better transit, better bike lanes, better sidewalks. And then that would give people options. And sometimes it's, for a family of 4 to not have to have 4 cars. Maybe they only have 1 car or 2 cars. These are the kinds of things. It can be an incremental change, and I think incremental change is necessary when you're facing problems of this scale, right? But to say that, well, if you live in North America, you just have to own a car, like that seems like a radical position to me. I think that what's a much more reasonable position is to say, well, we have all of these cities that have dense downtowns and relatively dense residential neighborhoods. Shouldn't those places be ones where you can have more choices about having to get around and less dependence on these multinational corporations that are selling you fossil fuels and automobiles? I think that people might want choices, and it's frightening sometimes to imagine a world in which there are more choices or to even hope for one. But really, that's what we're advocating is to just have more options.
Do you ever meet people who work in the auto industry? Like, do they
Yes.
ever? What do they say? Because I know
Yes.
I've had cousins who've worked in the auto industry. It employs a lot of people. What do they say to you when you tell them?
Well, there's
about
the
this?
employment side of it, of course. Like,
Yeah.
these are huge industries and they're not going away, nor should we get rid of them, right? Like, we talk a lot about a just transition. Like, the people building automobiles, like, they could be building public transit vehicles. That would be a really great way to switch one for one these union jobs that are so important to Canada, to the United States, to a lot of countries. But we have a lot of car enthusiasts who listen to the show. And what they will say is that, I love driving, I love working on my car, and I love your show because I hate traffic. And what we often say is that if you love driving, if driving to work is your jam, and you love the 40 minutes or so that you get to listen to music, have your alone time, cool. What you should want is for every other person on the road to have the option to bike or take transit instead. And so the car enthusiasts and people in the auto industry, they sort of get it. And I also think you can look at the auto industry right now and get that they understand they have a really bad product that people just don't want. Most of the car ads don't talk about the features of the car anymore. Some car ads talk about how bad traffic is and how, like, isn't it nice to just relax in your little isolation chamber? They just have people talk about bicycles as this old-fashioned technology. The car hasn't changed all that much either in 100 years. It's electric now. They were electric back then. Safety features have changed, but 4 wheels and a steering wheel and 4 seats, 5 seats, that's pretty much the same. So we do have folks in the auto industry who say, yeah, we get it. And even the head of Ford Motor Company has said that, like, maybe in the future, Ford will be a mobility company selling people different forms of mobility than just a car that you need.
Well, maybe we can end on just some ways that people can wean themselves off our car dependence.
There are a lot of things that individuals can do in their own lives that I think are really interesting and important. And one of them is to just give yourself a challenge to use the car less in your own life. If there are options, if you can walk sometimes, if you can ride a bike, if that is available to you, just try it, see how it feels, and maybe give yourself a week or a month where you say, I'm going to use the car less. I think that what you might experience is a new kind of engagement with your own community. Even if you're doing something like parking farther away from the store that you're going to and walking a few blocks through the community, you might see people, you might see stores, you might see things that you never would have seen before. So that's one way of doing it. And let's say that you want to try using transit, but you're scared of using transit because you don't know how it works, or you're intimidated by it in some way. Because a lot of people in this continent, anyway, don't really know how to use cities very well. They maybe didn't grow up using transit, and so that seems intimidating to them. Well, but maybe you have that friend at work who does take transit. Ask them, hey, would you ride with me? Or if you're the person who does take transit, offer that to somebody else. I'll be your transit buddy. I'll be your bike buddy, and show you how it works. And then it might start to unlock possibilities. I think that's one really simple thing that you can do. But in order to do it, you need transit to ride and bike lanes to ride in and sidewalks to walk on. And that's where political will comes in.
I would also recommend people find advocacy groups like Cycle Toronto and pedestrian advocacy groups that find the people who are working on this and either ask how you can help or for just tips on how to get around. But yeah, the political will is just huge. And I think the thing that people who bike or people who want to walk and take transit more need to do is get organized, find other people who are like-minded. One of the things we talk about in the book literally is just find your people. Talk to people in your community. A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm the weirdo. I want to bike to the grocery store. I want to bike to work. If you start talking to people, you might find that you're not alone. And then all it takes is 2 or 3 of you to go to a public meeting or to call your city council person. They're usually very accessible, and say, hey, I hear there's a plan to maybe put a bike lane on this street. We're in favor of that. Because they're going to hear from the people who are against it. So I think, speaking up and becoming a political constituency, look, you do need those forward-thinking elected officials who know that this is the right thing to do. Very few of those people pop up organically. They pop up because of the grassroots coalition that says, hey, we want something different. And we will support you, the elected official, if you do good things. So when your elected officials do good things, tell them. When they do bad things, politely tell them maybe they should do something else. But become a political force. You can, with just a few people.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. Doug, Sarah, thank you so much, guys.
This is great.
Thanks so much.
I'm JN. Thanks for watching The Rundown. We'd love to know what you think, so send us your suggestions and feedback at tvo.org/rundownfeedback, or leave us a comment on YouTube. Until then, I'll see you tomorrow.